centers around alleged hush money payments made before he was elected to office in 2016, around $130,000 worth. What we can expect so far, he's going to be traveling to the courthouse voluntarily. He'll be processed, and then he's going to be arraigned in court. But until then, we're going to kind of get some analysis on what we've seen play out so far and what we can expect. We're joined now by Mark Jones, professor at Rice, paying attention to this pretty closely as well. Thanks for joining us this afternoon, Mark.
Oh, sure. It's my pleasure.
Yeah. So what's your take on this indictment so far? It's unprecedented.
Well, it is unprecedented. I think I think it's indicative of the increasingly polarized nature of our political system. In the past, I think most people on either side of the aisle would have avoided moving towards prosecuting a former president, even if they believed he might have been guilty of something, just because of the precedent it sets, as well as sort of the damage it does to the office. Now, Trump is a president like no other that we've had in modern history, in the sense that he's lived in the gray area between illegal and legal for most of his adult life. So he certainly is no stranger to courtrooms. But what's different now is that this is in the position of a former president. I think there's going to be a lot of questions about whether this indictment can actually stick, in the sense that it's not the strongest of indictments. It also is at the margins understandable why he might pay money for reasons other than politics. So, I think for Trump's perspective, this is the first, but it may not be the last. And if he's thinking about being worried about something, I would probably be much more worried about the January 6th potential indictment than this one.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. What do you think of possibilities of other indictments happening? You see it on like TV crime shows all the time, right? Someone comes in for one charge and then they suddenly face others. Do you think that the same thing can play out here?
It's quite possible that we could see an indictment for January 6th. We could see an indictment for intervention in the Georgia election, trying to overturn those results, and for the Mar-a-Lago, essentially confidential documents that were taken down there. Now they've broken through the sort of precedent of indicting a president once, so I think it might be easier for them to do it for a second, third, or fourth time, especially on charges that are likely to be more politically relevant and perhaps more substantial, if not somewhat more difficult to prove than the ones in this case.
So a lot of people have seen this, and over the last few days, even in the public, I've had this same question. Many people see this and they automatically think about his run for president. How does this impact that, if at all?
I think one way this impacts his run for president is within the Republican primary. It makes it far more likely that he's going to go the distance and not drop out at any point, because he's much better able to claim that he's being persecuted politically, as well as to raise money if he's a presidential candidate rather than simply a private citizen and former president. It also will allow him, from a populist perspective, to mobilize his supporters by saying he's being persecuted politically, and that when they come after him, they're really coming after his supporters. So it may well help him in the Republican primary. The one place where it could hurt him, though, is if he captures the Republican nomination. It's going to make him all the more weaker candidate running against probably Joe Biden in November of 2024, just because it adds one more set of doubts about his fitness to serve as president of the United States. Republican Ron DeSantis is in a difficult position in that he can't really attack Trump for this, but I would suspect that over time, DeSantis and his advocates are going to try to be making the message of, if Trump wins the Republican nomination, this indictment, as well as potential other indictments, make him a very weak candidate to run against Joe Biden. And not only would he lose, but he also might cause Republicans to lose control of the U.S. House and make them unable to take control of the U.S. Senate.
Okay. Well, Mark Jones, we know that you'll be paying attention to this just as much as we are. We know we have to go. So thank you. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it. We'll be checking in with you later on.
Thank you.
No problem. So again, we are currently waiting for this thing to play out in the courthouse in Manhattan. And until then, we're going to bring in our political reporter, Greg Grugan. He's been paying attention to this as well. Greg, you've been covering politics for a long time. Give me your thoughts on what you've seen so far.
Wow, I think this indictment gets the lid off. and I think Mark talked about that. It's probably the weakest of the indictments. And frankly, if you think about it, if Donald Trump had just written a personal check to Stormy Daniels instead of trying to launder it through his attorney and his corporation, there would be no charge here. But he did try to, I guess you would say, massage the system. But as Mark said, this is probably the weakest of the indictments, but it does set that precedent. It gets the lid off the bucket for the Georgia potential indictment, for the insurrection potential indictment, and for the holding secret documents indictment. You know, there are military members who are serving hard prison time for retaining records that were confidential, that were top secret. They're spending time in prison because of what they did, and to hold a president to a different standard would, in my mind, be hypocritical.
We've already seen the procedures are going to be different than a typical indictment and arraignment, you know, simply because of who he is. We're not sure if his mugshot will be released. There's no use of handcuffs. Should it be that way because he is a former president?
Well, I think there is some respect to the office being, I guess, offered. We see that here in Texas politics when office holders are under criminal indictment. They're allowed to surrender. They're not put through the normal channels. They get some privileges, so to speak. But the point here is this is the first time it's happened in U.S. history. You know, I was digging around my desk, Sherman. Remember this guy?
Yeah.
Senator Edwards. He was a presidential candidate. He ran into a pretty nasty scandal, and it ended his political career. Donald Trump has been through 5, 6, 7, 8 scandals worse than this, and he's still on his feet, still contending, still the front runner for the Republican nomination. It kind of tells you where our society is going. Saw some interesting numbers. CNN did some polling. 60% of Americans support this indictment. 40% say no. Most of them believe that there is a political component to it. But the key here is that independents are strongly breaking against the former president. And that foretells what could happen in 2024. If Republicans are looking for the strongest candidate to take on Joe Biden in 2024, they got to think long and hard about whether Donald Trump is that candidate.
Yeah, well, let's talk about what this does to his base. I mean, we've even seen some protesters showing up outside of the NYC courthouse, getting physical within the last 30, 45 minutes.
Yeah, as I watch it, I wonder if those folks are really thinking about conservative policies, conservative leadership, holding on to the U.S. House, possibly expanding that control in 2024, or is this a cult of personality? I mean, if you look on a policy basis, point by point, Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, Asa Hutchinson, all of those Republican candidates mirror Trump's positions on a lot of the issues, and yet they're sticking with him and not going with a stronger candidate. We'll see if that erodes as this indictment unfolds and others potentially.
So what if some of the politicians and political leaders here in Houston, what have they said about this as this played out over the last few days?
Privately, I talked to Republican leaders here in Greater Houston, and I think they're split, just like the Republican Party. Most of them would like to see the former president go away, step aside, and let a stronger candidate take on Joe Biden in 2024. Others are publicly supporting the president. Wesley Hunt, for one, and other congressional members in the delegation. They have placed their chips on Donald Trump, and they've got to stick it out until he steps aside.
Yeah, for a few more minutes. this could be a hard case to prosecute. I mean, I know you're not a legal analyst per se, but this could be a hard case to prosecute if that's all the DA's office is looking at. What do you think?
Well, as has been said ad nauseum, we don't know what's in these indictments, and whether it's only one felony charge as reported or multiple felony charges. But like I said, it gets the lid off the bucket. What if this president is facing multiple criminal indictments on multiple fronts in multiple jurisdictions? How electable is he? The Republicans have had difficulty getting the popular vote. They lost the last election. It was very close. But is this the guy? Is this the guy most Americans want to put their chips on, regardless of the successes achieved during his last term in office? Is it time to move on? And if the polling remains consistent, that independents, the messy middle, decides who's going to run this country, they're not choosing Donald Trump right now.
This is definitely priority number one on any press team's list, especially in the city of New York right now. And then they get hit with these restrictions on having cameras in the courtroom. You know, as a reporter, you're trying to bring out this information as quickly and as accurately as possible. How does that impact it, or is there a good reasoning for that?
Oh gosh, I'm not sure I have an opinion there. I'm probably more interested in how the other Republican candidates are going to pivot off of this and what their reaction is going to be. How Ron DeSantis is going to react, how Nikki Haley is going to react. Are they going to say this is an unjustified prosecution and essentially side with Donald Trump, or are they going to say, hey, look, there's so much smoke here, there has to be fire. We're talking about the future of the country and the Republican Party. Is this the guy we want to put our chips on? And I think those discussions are what I'm really interested in. Who's going to get out front and say, look, this guy is such damaged goods, we cannot win the messy middle of America and retain control of the House, win back the White House, and challenge for the Senate. That's what I'm most fascinated by and will be watching closely.
Talk a little bit about DeSantis and his response or no response, rather, to what's going on right now. Mark Jones alluded to it a little bit. How does one that looks to be the main competitor from Donald Trump in the Republican race, how do they respond to this right now?
I think they don't have to say a lot right now. They just have to let this unfold. But eventually they're going to have to. Eventually they're going to end up on a debate stage with Donald Trump. And I think as, like I said, getting the lid off of the array of prosecutions, when they start doubling up and you look at, and you see, wow, he's been indicted in Georgia. And it's almost certain he's going to be charged in terms of the classified documents. Although, look, Hillary Clinton did the same thing. And we found also that Vice President Pence had documents he shouldn't have had. The bottom line is he told his attorneys that he turned everything in and he hadn't. So I think we're going to see more charges, and eventually they've got to make the damaged goods argument and to tell other Republicans, look, as much as you respect this guy, as much as you want to follow this guy, he is a pathway to losing in 2024. Because I just can't see how it happens.
Did you ever think that you would see something like this being played out from a former or sitting U.S. president, Greg?
Absolutely not. I mean, I thought when the Grabia tape came out that it would sink his candidacy when he ran against Hillary Clinton. It did not. And so, to some degree, he's Teflon. Things just smooth off of him. But he's out of office now, and Republicans have a hard decision to make. is this the guy they're going to put their chips on?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Even during the pandemic, I mean, how that was handled, how it wasn't handled. Even his responses then, the controversy that he faced then. I mean, it seems like like you said, he is pretty Teflon, pretty bulletproof when it comes to public prosecution.
Look, I don't think he ever expected to be elected president when he first ran, and so everything that's happened to him subsequently has been value added. I've said privately and publicly, Donald Trump has 25% market share of the American public who will buy anything he's selling. And that's a powerful position. That's the worst case scenario for this guy, other than prison. I don't think that's going to happen. But I will tell you this. He's going to fight it till the last dog is dead. And Republicans are going to have to make a decision whether he's their guy, warts and all.
Yeah. Do you think that this playing out would play out in court even beyond the 2024 election, or do you think that it's going to be expedited simply because of who's involved here?
Good question. I think once you start it, you've got to finish it, and if you don't finish it, it adds credence to the argument that this was all political. This is all a political prosecution and not a righteous prosecution.
Okay. This will definitely be a topic for you on What's Your Point, am I right?
It's been a topic for What's Your Point for the last 8 years.
Yeah.
It keeps on giving.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. All right. We're waiting on some other folks to come in, but definitely.
Fire away. I'm just babbling at this point, but I'll offer whatever I can.
Sure. Yeah, you said you've been talking to or let's go to some of these Facebook comments. So Adam Reed says this will reelect him for sure. And some people, Annette Risch says, love Trump. Some say, are the Democrats really too stupid to realize they just gift wrapped the presidency and handed it to Republicans? Looks like people are already kind of, they have their minds made up on this thing.
Yeah. If you're on Team Trump, you're on Team Trump. I haven't seen very few defectors, but there are defectors, folks who are pragmatists who say, we think he is less electable than other Republicans in the field. Because all of those folks who are saying that that they stand by Trump, if he is not the nominee, are they going to go to the sideline? Are they going to support Trump as a third party candidate? I don't even know if that's in the works. But ultimately, if it's about which party is in control in Washington and whether a president with largely the same policy positions as Donald Trump is what they seek, if they can't have him, they've got some hard decisions to make.
We spoke to our legal analyst last week and another political analyst, Professor Bob Stein from Rice. We spoke to legal analyst Chris Tritico. They both said that surely the former president has really probably raised a lot of money in his campaign simply because of what's happened over the last few days. He wrote some campaign letters. He immediately went online, posted his statement, and he's going to Mar-a-Lago tonight to comment about what happens soon.
Newsflash: he never stopped raising money. This may be a spike, and as a good buddy of mine used to say, greenback will not be his holdback. But ultimately, the field of Republican candidates seeking to displace him, they've got to come up with some type of orchestrated strategy, because if they all take their piece of the Republican primary vote, Donald Trump very, very easily could be the party's nominee. It may be that they have to coalesce behind a non-Trump candidate. Maybe whether that's DeSantis or somebody else, I don't know.
Yeah, it is pretty bizarre though to see it playing out. We're looking up every few minutes on our TVs in the newsroom, paying attention to what's going on. The fact that he's going there, and then we also talked about how it was very undoubtedly that the Secret Service would not want to place the man that they've been sworn to protect in handcuffs.
Yeah, that's all symbolism. And it may well be that he doesn't have handcuffs on, or they place them on for a second and then immediately pull them off. I don't know. We'll see what happens. We are told he's going to say something before he goes to the building. You better believe he's going to say something tonight from Mar-a-Lago. It could be the second launch of his presidential candidacy.
All right. Well, our political reporter, Greg Grugan, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. We'll be keeping tabs on what's going on out there. Thank you.
You bet, Sherman.
Okay. So if you're just joining us on streaming, we are covering this indictment and the arraignment for the former U.S. President Donald Trump. He was indicted by a grand jury last week. He becomes the first U.S. president, sitting or former, to face a criminal charge. And this is years of investigations into his dealings as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, former president, centers around some alleged hush money payments before he was elected to office in 2016. So we're bringing in another analyst right now. We are speaking with Professor Alan. Alan Sanders. There we go. Professor Alan Sanders. Thank you so much for joining us. He is the a former Times Magazine senior reporter and professor emeritus of political science at St. Peter's University in New Jersey. Professor, thanks for joining us this afternoon. We appreciate it. And your phone's ringing off the hook, so it seems like everybody wants to talk to you.
Yes. Anyway, I'll try to speak to you in between phone calls.
Sure. Yeah. So, give me your take on this indictment. This is a big deal. It's unprecedented. It's something that I'm sure you didn't think you would see even as your time as a journalist.
That's true. We've never had a president or a former president indicted, and in that sense, it's historic. On the other hand, everything about Donald Trump's presidency has been unusual. His temperament, his behavior, the way he's conducted the office, and the politics that surround him. So I suppose in that sense, it's not surprising that we're winding up with an indictment for a rather tawdry set of circumstances. Certainly in New York, Donald Trump has been known to be scandal-ridden on a whole bunch of issues, but he's never faced a criminal indictment of any kind. And so for him, as well as for the country, this is historic and certainly unprecedented.
You spent a lot of time covering national stories. What do you think is the court's reasoning for its restrictions on cameras in the courtroom? This was something that a lot of journalists were talking about yesterday. Well,
courts in general don't like cameras in the courtroom. If you take a look, I mean, some courts do permit it because there is public interest. But in a court setting, the thing of the utmost importance is being fair to the defendant. And many courts believe that the cameras in the courtroom tend to create a kind of circus atmosphere. They also tend to create an inaccurate picture of what goes on in the courtroom because the clips that show up on television later are just, clips, sometimes out of context. And the clips, depending on the political bias of the particular media, could reflect unfavorably and unfairly on the case and on the defendant. So courts don't like that. They believe that hearings are all about the evidence. And in order to weigh the evidence properly, you got to hear all of the evidence, not just clips. So in order to be fair to the defendant, courts generally say, look, it's better that there not be cameras in the courtroom and that the only people who matter to determine the facts of a case are the jury.
Many people see this, they automatically think about his run for president. How do you think this impacts it or empowers it?
Well, I think it's too early to tell, but certainly much of the opinion surrounding Donald Trump is baked in. That is to say, his base will support him no matter what. And of course, those who oppose Trump will oppose him no matter what. It's clear that anybody who is indicted carries a lot of baggage and will have to provide a lot of justification in a campaign as to why he should be allowed to proceed to be elected to the office. My guess is that most people are concerned about what the candidates can do for them. That's what elections typically are all about. What can you do for me if I vote for you? And if all we have from Donald Trump is a series of woe me and I'm being persecuted and this is all a witch hunt, it doesn't answer the question of what are you going to do for me if I vote for you? And so I suspect that in the long run, this will not be of benefit to Donald Trump. It'll be baggage around him, scandals, another set of scandals around him. A lot of voters will say, let's start a new page. I want a candidate who can do something for me. And that would be somebody other than Donald Trump, I would suspect.
Okay. And right now on screen, we're looking at what we just saw, an image of what it looks like outside of the courthouse. I mean, for journalists, it's a media circus out there. It's a media nightmare out there because you're trying to cover everything and give accurate information while also seeing the crowds of people. We've already seen some people get physical out there who oppose Trump going into the courthouse. So talk about what do you think are the possibilities of other indictments that may happen out of this?
I think quite high. I think just moments ago, if I heard the reports correctly, an appeals court ruled against Donald Trump in the Mar-a-Lago case, clearing the way for many of his top aides to testify to the prosecutor, Jack Smith, about what they knew concerning the Mar-a-Lago documents and Donald Trump's activities related to the Mar-a-Lago documents. So if that report is true, those investigations are going forward, and they're going forward at full speed. I would also say that there's much attention to this case because, of course, it's the first one. And the first case always draws a lot of attention, a lot of points of view regarding, what the case is all about and what its meaning is. But if the other cases go forward, to indictment and to prosecution, they will clearly overshadow this case, which appears on its facts to be of less consequence than the Mar-a-Lago case or the January 6th case or the case in Georgia that is going on down there. So the first case is big because it's the first, but in terms of importance and of important legal consequences for Donald Trump, I think the other cases are much more serious if in fact they go forward and result in formal charges against him.
You're a topic of discussion in your lectures for quite a minute. How do younger voters and people wanting to learn about the political process, how do they view this right now?
Well, to be fair, I'm not teaching right now because I'm retired. But I can tell you that certainly Donald Trump elicits, when I was teaching, and he was president at the time, he elicited a lot of interest among young people because his presidency was so unusual. And so you got the polarization among students, just as you have among the general population. There are those who believe he's been persecuted from the get-go with his presidency, and there are those who have looked at his behavior and have said, why hasn't he been indicted sooner?